The chandelier of the Hanil Grand Ballroom held 4,000 crystals, and Dahlia Bennett Yoon had chosen every single one of them. Nobody in the room knew that. Not the board members raising champagne to her husband. Not the journalists photographing the marble columns she had sourced from a quarry outside Florence. Not the woman in the red dress currently laughing at something Jae-sung whispered into her ear. Dahlia stood near the east entrance holding her husband's cufflinks in her palm, the ones he'd left on the bathroom counter that morning, the ones his assistant had texted her about at 4 in the afternoon like she was a courier service and not a wife. The gold was warm now from how long she'd been holding it, 40 minutes. He hadn't looked at her once. She had learned, over 6 years of marriage, to read a room the way other people read weather, and tonight, the room felt wrong. Executives who used to bow to her were angling their shoulders away. The event coordinator wouldn't meet her eyes. Even the servers seemed to move around her like she was a piece of furniture scheduled for removal. She smoothed the front of her champagne-colored gown. The stylist Jae-sung insisted on had ordered it a full size too small, and when Dahlia had asked, quietly, if they could exchange it, the woman had smiled with all her teeth and said, "Maybe think of it as motivation." Dahlia had worn it anyway. She had gotten very good at wearing things that hurt. 20 minutes earlier, she had stood in the powder room off the mezzanine, gripping the edge of a gold-veined sink, practicing her face. 2 women had come in without checking the stalls. She knew their voices, wives of board members, women she had seated at her own dinner table and fed with her own recipes translated into their preferences. "Did you see what she's wearing?" the first one said. "The stylist dresses her. Poor thing probably can't tell anymore. Not the dress, her. Honestly, after tonight it won't matter. My husband says it's already done. The Seo girl's father signed the term sheet Tuesday. The wedding pays for the whole Cheongdam expansion. A pause, water running, the snap of a lipstick cap. She was useful once, I'll give her that. The Chicago thing. But you can't take that to a shareholders meeting, can you? Laughter, soft and expensive, and the door swinging shut. Dahlia had stood there for a long moment, looking at the woman in the mirror, a woman with her mother's cheekbones and a stranger's dress, and she had thought, with terrible clarity, they're not even trying to hide it anymore, which means whatever is coming has already come. Then she had reapplied her lipstick with a steady hand, because her mother raised her to never let them watch you break, and gone back downstairs. She crossed the ballroom to give her husband his cufflinks. That was all she meant to do. Cross the room, hand him the small gold weight she'd been carrying like a duty. Maybe he would say thank you. 6 years ago he used to kiss the inside of her wrist when she fixed his collar. She was 10 feet away when the woman in red put a hand flat on Jae-sung's chest, and Jae-sung let her. The woman was Seo Ara, 26, daughter of the Seo Group chairman. 2 million followers who watched her drink morning celery juice on a terrace in Hanamdong. Dahlia knew all of this the way you know things about a storm that has been circling your house for months. "Do it now," Ara said, low, laughing, her eyes flicking toward Dahlia and then away, like Dahlia was a passing waiter. "You promised, before the toast." And Yoon Jae-sung, chief executive of the Yoon Hanil Group, a man who once stood in a Chicago hotel lobby with rain in his hair and told Dahlia she was the most interesting person he had ever met, turned around. He looked at his wife the way a man looks at a stain. "Here," Dahlia said. She opened her palm. "You forgot these." He didn't take them. The nearest circle of executives had gone quiet in that hungry, deliberate way people go quiet when they've been waiting for a show. Somewhere to her left, a phone rose above the crowd, camera lens patient and black. "I want a divorce," Jae-sung said. The words landed in the middle of a string quartet playing something soft. Dahlia heard the cello continue for 2 more bars before the musician faltered. "Jae-sung," she said. Her voice stayed level. It astonished her, distantly, that it stayed level. "Not here." "Yes, here," he said. And now he raised his voice just enough, just deliberately enough, that she understood this was staged, that the audience was the point. "Everyone already knows. You're the only one still pretending. Look at yourself." He gestured at her, one clean flick of the wrist, a man returning a dish at a restaurant. "You're too fat for me. You've been too fat for 2 years. I have an image, and every time you stand next to me you cost me something." Someone laughed. It was cut short, but it existed, and Dahlia would hear it for months. The room did not spin. That was the strange thing. The room became very, very still and very sharp, and she could see everything, the sweat on the event coordinator's lip, the way Ara had angled her body so the cameras caught her good side, the 4,000 crystals she had chosen one October afternoon when she was 27 and believed she was building something that included her. Dahlia looked down at the cufflinks in her hand, then she stepped forward, took her husband's hand, and pressed them into it, folding his fingers closed the way you'd close a child's fist around lunch money. "You'll want these," she said quietly. "You've never once dressed yourself." She turned. The crowd parted, not out of respect, out of appetite, everyone wanting a clean view of her face, and she gave them nothing, chin level, steps unhurried. 8 years of being told to shrink, and the one thing they'd accidentally taught her was how to hold a shape under pressure. She made it through the lobby. She made it past the doorman who had known her for 6 years and who looked at his shoes. She made it down the marble steps she had designed to catch the light of the porte cochere, and then the sky opened up, and the rain came down like it had been holding its breath all night too. She stood in it. Her car, of course, was Jae-sung's car. Her driver was Jae-sung's driver. Her phone was in a clutch she had left on a table in a ballroom she was never going to enter again. The rain flattened her hair in seconds. It was almost a relief, having a reason to be wet-faced. She didn't hear the man approach. She only noticed when the rain above her head stopped, and she looked up into the black canopy of an umbrella, and then at the hand holding it, and then, briefly, at him. Tall, dark coat, no logo, the kind of plainness that costs more than ornament. He wasn't looking at her with pity, which she would have hated, or curiosity, which she would have hated more. He was looking out at the street, giving her his shoulder and his silence, holding the umbrella over her like it was the most ordinary thing in the world to stand in a downpour keeping a stranger dry. "I'm fine," she said. "I know," he said. He kept the umbrella where it was. A black car slid to the curb in front of them. He pressed the umbrella handle into her hand, wrapped her fingers around it without touching them, the warmth of his palm hovering a centimeter above her knuckles. "Take it," he said. "I don't mind the rain." He walked to the car through the wet and was gone before she thought to look at his face properly. She stood alone under a stranger's umbrella outside her own hotel, and that was when her borrowed phone, the clutch, someone had run it out to her, the coordinator, eyes still lowered, buzzed in her hand. A news alert, published 9 minutes ago, before Jae-sung had said a single word to her. Yoon Hanul Seo To Wed So Group Harris in spring. Sources confirm divorce filed 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. He had filed 3 weeks ago. The gala, the dress one size too small, the cameras, all of it had been a set, and she had walked into it carrying his cufflinks. The rain hammered the umbrella. Dahlia read the headline twice, and something in her chest that had been bent for years quietly finished breaking, and something else, something older and harder, opened one eye. The law offices of Kwon and Baek occupied the 31st floor of a tower in Gwanghwamun, and the conference room smelled like new leather and old money. Dahlia sat on one side of a table long enough to seat 12, on the other side sat 3 of Jae-sung's attorneys. Jae-sung himself had not come. Of course he hadn't. He sent lawyers the way other people sent condolence flowers. The prenuptial agreement is unambiguous, the senior attorney said, sliding the document across the glass. Assets acquired through the marriage remain with the party who generated the capital. Mrs. Yoon contributed no capital. No capital, Dahlia repeated. No financial capital, the attorney amended smoothly, as if that were a kindness. She looked at the paper. 6 years. The flagship hotel concept she had sketched at their kitchen table when the board wanted to fire him, the investor dinners she had hosted, in Korean she'd taught herself from library books and humiliation, the design language of 11 properties, the 4,000 crystals. None of it was capital. It had all been absorbed, quietly, into the great sponge of his name. Her own lawyer, a tired woman named Grace O, whom Dahlia could barely afford, leaned in. "We can contest. For what?" Dahlia asked softly. "Half of a man who announced me like a defect?" She signed. She watched her married name come off her like a coat that had never been cut for her shoulders anyway. Bennett. Dahlia Bennett. She wrote it slowly, and it felt like the first true sentence she'd written in years. Outside, the December air was clean and brutal. She had 11 days to vacate the penthouse, 1 suitcase of clothes that were hers before the stylists, and a checking account that would survive perhaps 4 months of a city like Seoul. That night she checked into a business hotel in Mapo with thin towels and a view of a parking structure, and discovered what the internet had been doing with her life. The clip had 4 million views. Someone had subtitled it in 6 languages. There were slow-motion edits of her face at the exact moment he said the word fat, set to sad piano, and comment sections that ranged from cruelty so casual it read like weather reports, to strangers in Lagos and Atlanta and Manila typing paragraphs of fury on her behalf. One comment had 200,000 likes. It said, "Watch her hands." She folded his fingers around those cufflinks like she was tucking him in. That woman buried him politely, and he doesn't even know he's dead. Dahlia read that one 4 times. Then she closed the laptop, ran the shower as hot as the pipes allowed, and cried for exactly as long as the hot water lasted, which was 11 minutes, and when it went cold she turned it off, and that was the last time. She had given that marriage 6 years. She decided, standing on a cheap bath mat in a rented room, dripping, that it could not have her 12th minute. She also had a stranger's umbrella. It was, on inspection, an absurdly beautiful object. Ebony handle, hand-stitched canopy, along the inside of one rib, embroidered in gray thread you'd only find if you were the kind of person who looked, a single crane in flight. 3 days later she found the crane again, stitched into the corner of the doorman's pocket squares at the Astor Hotel in Cheongdam, a quiet, severe building she had always admired the way designers admire a rival's restraint. She came to return the umbrella. She stayed because it was cold, because the lobby lounge smelled like bergamot, and because for the first time in a decade, nobody in a hotel knew who she was. She ordered the cheapest tea on the menu and made it last 2 hours. She sketched on a napkin, an old habit, her hand moving before her permission, redrawing the lounge around her. It was a beautiful room that had been arranged by someone who had never sat in it. The armchairs faced the entrance like a firing squad. The flower arrangement, white lilies, funeral flowers in half of Asia, blocked the sightline that would have let a guest watch snow fall on the courtyard maple, which was the only honest thing in the room. When the server came, Dahlia nodded at the arrangement. "Could I?" she began, then stopped herself. Old instinct, apologize, shrink, she breathed. Started again. "If you move those lilies half a meter left and swap them for branches, plum or quince, anything with a line to it, this whole corner will finally make sense." And the table wobbles. She had already folded a sugar packet and leveled it without thinking, 10 minutes ago, the way she fixed things, automatically, invisibly. The server blinked, glanced across the lounge at someone, and then, to Dahlia's mild astonishment, moved the lilies. "The corner made sense. You do this often." A voice, low, unhurried, from the next table. "Rearrange rooms that don't belong to you." She turned. He sat with the stillness of a man who never had to fill silence. No phone on the table, only an espresso and a book turned face down. Mid-30s. Not handsome the way magazines meant it, handsome the way architecture was, all load-bearing lines and no decoration. She had the vertiginous feeling she'd seen his shoulders before, in the dark, in the rain, but the thought didn't finish forming. Rooms always belong to whoever's sitting in them, she said. Ownership is just paperwork. Something moved through his eyes, interest, banked quickly, like a man covering a good hand of cards. He looked at the corner she'd corrected. "The staff have walked past those lilies for 2 years, he said. "Staff aren't paid to see, they're paid to not be seen." There's a difference, and it's usually management's fault. She sipped her tea, found it long gone cold, drank it anyway. "Do you work here?" "Something like that," he said. "Then tell whoever chose these armchairs that guests don't want to face the door. People come to hotel lounges to watch and not be watched. Turn everything 15 degrees toward the courtyard and your average table time will go up an hour." She heard herself and almost laughed. "Sorry, I used to do this for a living. Apparently I still do it for free." "Used to," he repeated. Not a question, exactly. He had a way of setting words down gently, like he was placing them on a scale. "Used to," she said, and did not explain, and he did not ask, and there was a whole minute of silence between two strangers that felt, inexplicably, like the most restful minute she had spent in years. She left the umbrella with the concierge, described the man badly, tall, quiet, drinks espresso like it's a discipline, and walked out into the snow. Behind her, in the lounge, the man turned the napkin she'd left behind, the sketch of the corrected room, and looked at it for a long time. His assistant appeared at his shoulder. "Sir, Yoon Hanel Group has formally requested a meeting. Yoon Jae-sung is seeking Mirai Capital's investment for the Cheongdam expansion. He's asking for you personally." Ryu Daehyun folded the napkin once, precisely, and slid it into his breast pocket, behind the space where his pocket square should have been, if he hadn't given his umbrella away 3 nights ago, outside another man's hotel. "Schedule it," he said. The penthouse took 4 days to erase her. Dahlia packed in the mornings when the light through the floor-to-ceiling glass was too honest for self-pity. It was strange, cataloging a marriage by object. Almost nothing in 70 floors of sky was actually hers. The art had been chosen by a consultant. The clothes were costumes for a role called Mrs. Yoon. Even the books had been bought by the meter, spines color-matched to the shelves, and when she pulled her old dog-eared paperbacks from behind them, they looked like stowaways. Mrs. Im found her sitting on the closet floor with a shoebox. The housekeeper was 60 and had a face like a walnut and had been, for 6 years, the only person in the building who asked Dahlia if she had eaten. She sat down on the floor beside her without ceremony, knees cracking. "Chicago," Mrs. Im said, nodding at the box. "Chicago," Dahlia agreed. Inside, a scholarship medal from a design school she'd attended on grants and night shifts. A photograph of her mother, Ruthie Bennett, standing in front of the South Side hair salon she'd run for 31 years, one hand on her hip, laughing at whoever held the camera. A brooch shaped like a magnolia, costume gold, her mother's Sunday brooch, worth $11 and everything. She met Jae-sung when she was 25, at the opening of a hotel she'd worked on as the most junior designer on the team, the one they let attend because someone canceled. He was 30, running his father's smallest overseas property into the ground, drowning and hiding it beautifully. He'd found her at the edge of the party, sketching the lobby on a cocktail napkin, and instead of a pickup line he'd asked, "What would you change?" And she had told him the truth for 45 minutes, and he had listened like her mind was a country he wanted to live in. For 2 years, it was real. She believed that even now, and hated that she believed it. He faxed her sketches at midnight. He flew to Chicago 11 times in 14 months. When his father's board tried to shut down the Chicago property, it was her redesign, her concept of quiet luxury, warm minimalism, a decade before the industry caught up, that turned the numbers. He proposed in the finished lobby. He said, "Build the rest of it with me." What he meant, she understood much later, was build the rest of it for me. Soul swallowed her by degrees. First the name. Hers was hard for the board to pronounce, so she became simply Mrs. Yoon. Then the work, just until the company stabilizes, he said, and the stabilizing never ended, and somewhere in there, her design career became his design instinct, her sketches redrawn by his staff architects, her fingerprints wiped from every surface at the level of the press release. Then her body became a corporate asset to be managed. A nutritionist appeared in her kitchen like a haunting, whispered comments at dinners. In Korean they assumed she didn't understand, and later, when they knew she understood, said anyway. She missed her mother's last year because there was always a gala, always an opening. She made it to Chicago for the funeral and stood at the grave alone, jet-lagged, in designer black chosen by a stylist, and Jae-sung had texted, "Condolences," and then, in the same message, "The Beijing investors moved to Thursday. Need you back." She had flown back Thursday. That was the thing she could not forgive herself. Not his cruelty, her obedience. At the funeral, her mother's church had been full. Women Ruthie had done hair for over 3 decades, came in their Sunday best, and one of them, Miss Odette, 80 years old, had held Dahlia's face in both hands at the repast and said, "Your mama showed me your picture every single week." Every week, baby, the magazine ones, the hotel ones, she'd tell anybody who sat in her chair, "My daughter builds palaces." Miss Odette's thumbs had wiped tears Dahlia hadn't felt fall. She kept a folder, baby. Under the register. You go look. Dahlia had looked. Under the salon register, in a manila folder soft with handling, her mother had kept every clipping that mentioned the Chicago hotel, every one, and in each article where the design was credited to Yoon Hanul Group's visionary leadership, her mother had drawn a neat ballpoint arrow pointing at nothing, at the white space beside the words, and written the same thing in the margin, every time. "That's Dahlia's. That's Dahlia's. That's Dahlia's. That's Dahlia's." 14 articles, 14 arrows. A 62-year-old hairdresser on the south side of Chicago, quietly correcting the international press with a ballpoint pen, keeping the truth alive under a cash register like contraband. She had taken the folder back to Seoul and hidden it with the portfolio, and told herself it was sentiment. It was not sentiment, it was evidence. Her mother had known exactly what she was doing. Her mother had been building a case. Mrs. Im touched the magnolia brooch with one finger. "Your mother made things too?" "She made women beautiful," Dahlia said. 31 years. She used to say, "I don't change anybody, baby, I just turn the lights on." Mrs. Im nodded slowly, as if this were scripture. Then she stood, went to the service closet, and came back dragging a long flat portfolio case, dust-furred, wedged for years behind winter linens where Dahlia had hidden it from her own longing. "You take this," Mrs. Im said. It was an order. Dahlia unzipped it on the closet floor. Her drawings, her originals, the ones from the kitchen table years, and on top, in a plastic sleeve, a full concept set she had forgotten she'd kept. The Hanul Grand, the flagship, the ballroom, the marble, the light studies for the porte cochere steps, the chandelier, 4,000 crystals annotated in her handwriting. Dated 14 months before the hotel broke ground. Signed, in the confident hand of a woman who still existed somewhere, D. Bennett. The building Jae-sung called his masterpiece in every interview, the one he'd humiliated her inside. Dahlia sat very still on the floor of a closet in the sky, holding the proof of her own erasure, and the strangest feeling rose in her, not rage, not yet, something quieter and more dangerous, recognition. "There you are," she thought. Her phone rang. Unknown number, a Seoul exchange. She almost let it die. On the last ring she answered. "Is this Ms. Bennett?" A crisp voice. Not Mrs. Yoon, Ms. Bennett. 2 syllables she hadn't heard aloud in 6 years, and they landed like rain on something parched. Speaking. "My name is Song Jia. I'm calling from Mirai Capital, from the office of the chairman." She paused, and there was something almost puzzled in her professionalism, as if she herself couldn't quite explain the instructions she'd been given. "The chairman would like to know if you're available," he says, and I'm quoting him exactly. "He'd like to discuss the 15 degrees." Dahlia looked down at the portfolio, at her own name, at the magnolia brooch on the carpet catching the last of the afternoon light. "Tell him," she said, "I don't work for free anymore." There was a silence on the line, and then, unmistakably, in the background, a low sound that might have been a laugh. The Marigold was a 28-seat restaurant in a crooked Itaewon alley, and it belonged to Antonia Bennett Cole, who answered to Tony and absolutely nothing else, and who opened her door at 7 in the morning to find her cousin standing on the step with one suitcase, one portfolio case, and 11 months of unshed exhaustion. Tony looked at the suitcase. She looked at Dahlia. Then she stepped aside and said, "I've had the second bedroom ready since October, because I watched the news, and I made oxtail yesterday, and if you apologize for anything in the next 72 hours, I will put you back out in the street." Dahlia laughed for the first time in 19 days, and the laugh turned into something else halfway through, and Tony held her in the doorway until it finished, patting her back with a spatula still in one hand, saying, "There it is. Let it out. That man has a forehead like a rental car anyway." Tony had come to Seoul 4 years earlier, chasing a Korean grandmother's recipes and a divorce of her own, and she'd built the Marigold out of stubbornness and short ribs. The apartment upstairs smelled permanently of toasted sesame and cornbread, an impossible, wonderful collision, and Dahlia slept her first real night of sleep in a bed under a window that looked at a wall, and it was the best view she'd had in years, because nobody was looking back. Healing did not arrive like a montage. It arrived like a job. It looked like Tony dragging her to the Han River at 6 in the morning 3 days a week, because Tony walked fast and grieved loud and believed cardio was cheaper than lawyers. It looked like a therapist in Yongsan named Dr. Cho who let Dahlia sit in silence for whole minutes and once said, quietly, "You keep describing yourself as what you did for other people, and I'm going to sit here until you tell me one thing you are," and Dahlia had opened her mouth to say a wife, then a designer, and finally, in a voice she barely recognized, said, "Hungry," and Dr. Cho had smiled and said, "Good, we can work with hungry." It looked like eating Tony's food without translating it into numbers first. Her body changed that year the way a house changes when someone finally lives in it, not renovated for viewing, inhabited, walked strong, fed properly, slept deep. She got stronger on the river path. Her face lost the tightness of a woman perpetually braced. Whatever the scale said became, for the first time since Seoul, none of anyone's business, including hers. And it looked like work. The Marigold's dining room was Tony's cooking wearing a bad outfit, and one dead Tuesday in February Dahlia stood in the middle of it, chewing her thumbnail, and said, "Let me fix it. Just this one room. I can't pay you, cousin. Feed me and give me the walls." She did it for almost nothing, with reclaimed wood and second-hand brass and one perfect deep green paint she mixed herself, curved the banquettes so strangers ended up talking, hid the lighting so every woman in the room looked like a memory someone would kill to get back. She hand-lettered the menus. She put her mother's magnolia, cast in plaster, small, unexplained, above the kitchen door. A food blogger came in March. Then a design account with 1 million followers posted the green corner with the caption, "Whoever did this room understands loneliness." And by June there was a wait list, and the wait list had a wait list, and taped inside the register, where customers couldn't see it, Tony kept a printout of the post with a ballpoint arrow pointing at the corner, and the words, "That's Dahlia's." Dahlia found it in July and had to stand in the kitchen with her hand over her mouth for a while. Studio Dahlia existed by August. One rented desk, one assistant, a business license she framed and hung crooked on purpose, because it made her happy. Small jobs first, a bookshop, a dentist who cried at the reveal, a boutique hotel in Buamdong with 9 rooms and no budget that ended up in a magazine anyway. And on Thursdays, there was the man. He came alone, always the corner two-top, always ordered by asking Tony, "What should I want tonight?" which delighted Tony into a state approaching matrimony. He tipped like a roomer. He read actual books. Twice Dahlia caught herself watching the line of his shoulders and thought, distantly, that he reminded her of someone, of rain, of a lobby, and lost the thread when the kitchen bell rang. The first time he came, in April, it had rained, and he had arrived without an umbrella, which struck Dahlia as odd for a man whose coat cost more than the restaurant's monthly rent, odd in a way she couldn't name, like a joke she was standing inside of. Tony had seated him at the corner two-top because it was the only table left, and he had looked around the green room slowly, at the curved banquettes, the hidden light, the plaster magnolia over the kitchen door, with an attention that wasn't a customer's attention. It was closer to the way people stand in front of paintings of home. "Who did this room?" he'd asked Tony. "My cousin," Tony said, loud enough to be heard in the kitchen, because Tony missed no opportunity. "She's a genius, and she's single." "Tony," the kitchen said. The man had smiled down at his menu, a small private event, and ordered by surrender, and stayed 2.5 hours, and left a tip that made Tony sit down. and he had come back every Thursday since, through spring and the hot barrel of summer, and he never once asked for Dahlia, never angled for an introduction, never did any of the things men did. He simply arrived and read and ate and watched the room work, and sometimes, when Dahlia came out of the kitchen to fix something, a flickering bulb, a draught, a table's wobble, she would feel his attention like sun through a window, warm and unhurried and asking for nothing, and she found, to her enormous irritation, that she had started checking whether the corner table was set on Thursdays before she checked anything else. "He's here for you, you know," Tony said one night, drying glasses. "He's here for your Galby Jim. Cousin." Tony set the glass down with the patience of a woman explaining gravity. "That man watched you fix the wobbly leg on table 9 with a folded coaster and looked at you like you'd raised the dead. Nobody feels that way about Galby Jim." Dahlia flicked her with a towel and did not think about it, in the way that women think about nothing else for 3 days. Then, on a Thursday in September, 1 year almost to the week since the rain, the industry press exploded. Mirae Capital, the most secretive money in the country, was finally developing the legendary empty lot in Cheongdam, a full luxury flagship, and it was doing something no chaebol did. An open design competition, anyone could submit. The shortlist would be announced in October. Tony slid the article across the counter with one finger, eyebrows already at her hairline. Dahlia read it twice, then she looked up and said, quietly, "Tony, look at the last paragraph." The shortlist, 3 firms, would present final concepts at a gala in December, venue to be announced, and the article's final line, the reason Tony's eyebrows had achieved orbit, was a quote from an unnamed Mirae insider, saying the chairman had personally insisted on one criterion above all others. "We're not looking for the biggest name," the insider said. "The chairman says he wants the one who fixes things nobody asked them to fix." Studio Dahlia made the shortlist, and the trade press called it a shock, and Dahlia laminated the announcement and gave it to Tony for the register. Mirae Capital ran its design reviews out of a 40th floor room with a table of raw black walnut, and it was known, the way weather is known, that the chairman never attended vendor sessions. He attended hers. The first time, staff visibly recalibrated around his presence like iron filings around a magnet. He sat at the far end, said nothing for 50 minutes, and watched. Dahlia presented the way she'd presented at 24, before anyone taught her fear. Halfway through, a junior Mirae analyst asked a question the room clearly considered stupid, about why she'd oriented the lobby off-axis, and 2 directors began talking over him, and Dahlia stopped, waited for silence, and said, "Actually, his question is the whole project," and answered it for 10 full minutes, directly to the kid, whose ears went red with vindication. At the end, the chairman spoke for the first time. "Your budget line for the atrium is wrong," he said. The room froze. Dahlia checked her own document, then looked up. "No," she said. "Yours is. Your quantity surveyor priced Italian travertine. I specified Korean granite from Pocheon. It's better in your climate. It ages instead of staining, and it's a third the cost. If you'd like to spend the difference, spend it on your staff corridors." She turned the page. "Your people spend 11 hours a day in the back of house. In my building, the back of house gets windows." Nobody breathed. The chairman of Mirae Capital looked at her down the length of the black walnut table, and something happened at the corner of his mouth that 2 vice presidents would later describe, in hushed tones, as almost a smile. "Windows," he repeated, like he was setting the word down on a scale. "Windows," she said. After that he came to every session, and Dahlia began to notice him back, because noticing was her profession. She noticed he remembered every number from every previous meeting without notes. She noticed he asked questions the way surgeons cut, once, precisely, no flourish. She noticed that when she spoke, he angled his whole chair toward her, not his neck, his chair, and that he did this for no one else. What she did not know was what he noticed. Ryu Daehyun had built Mirae from a dead textile firm into $40 billion by seeing what people did when they thought it didn't count, and Dahlia Bennett was the only person he had ever met who behaved as if everything counted and nothing was being counted. He watched her straighten the crooked Liu Fan print in his own boardroom on her way out, absently, the way other people close a drawer. He watched her learn the names of the 40th floor staff. The security man's daughter had just passed her exams. The coffee woman's mother was ill. He knew this now only because Dahlia asked them in the elevator. He watched her let her coffee go cold and drink it anyway, every session, and one afternoon he had a cup brought to her lukewarm from the start, and she looked down at it, then at him, eyes narrowed, and said, "You notice that? You drink it cold. You start it hot so it lasts longer. You do the same thing with good news." The room had gone very quiet. Dahlia held his gaze for a moment too long to be professional, and then said, softly, "That's an unsettling talent, Chairman Ryu." And he said, "So I've been told." and did not look away. On a sight walk in late October, the Cheongdam lot raw and fenced under a hard blue sky, the group came upon a stray cat that had made a den in a stack of drainage pipe, thin, wary, one ear ragged, and the project manager moved to call someone to deal with it, and Dahlia said, "Don't," and crouched in her sight boots in front of $40 billion worth of entourage, and simply waited, hand loose and open on her knee, not reaching, not coaxing. The cat watched her for a long minute, then it touched its nose to her fingers. "You don't reach," Daehyun said, later, as the group walked the foundation line. It wasn't quite a question. "Reaching is about you," she said, citing down a chalk line. "Waiting is about them. Everything worth having comes to an open hand eventually, Chairman." She glanced up, and something wry crossed her face. "Or it doesn't, and then it was never yours, and you've saved yourself the vet bills." He laughed. Out loud, once, an actual sound, and half his staff turned around to see what impossible thing had occurred. Song Jia wrote the date in her private file. There was a line item on the next site budget for a heated shelter, feeding station, and veterinary care, coded discreetly under pest management. Dahlia found it during her audit. Of course she found it, she found everything, and said nothing, but the following Thursday at the Marigold she sent his table dessert, unordered, and stood in the kitchen doorway while he looked at it, then at her, the whole restaurant between them, and she said, one word, pest management, and he said nothing at all, but he ate every bite, and Tony, watching this entire exchange with a dish towel pressed to her chest, whispered, "I am going to have to cater this wedding." He noticed the flinch too. A photographer for the internal newsletter fired a flash without warning during a sight walk, and her whole body answered it, a fraction of a second, shoulders up, chin down, a woman bracing for a ballroom, gone so fast no one else saw. Daehyun saw. That evening the photographer received new instructions, no flash photography at any event connected to the Cheongdam project, no exceptions, and no explanation was given, and Dahlia never knew, which was the point. Song Jia, his chief of staff, who had worked for him for 9 years and had watched him dismantle rivals over breakfast without raising his pulse, began compiling a private mental file of anomalies. The chairman kept a framed napkin in his bottom drawer. The chairman had quietly acquired, through a shell entity, the umbrella company, the actual company that made the umbrellas, and when she'd asked why, he'd said, "They stitch things that last," and turned back to his window. The chairman ate dinner every Thursday at a 28-seat restaurant in Itaewon, and returned to the office afterward with the residue of a smile that took hours to fully leave his face. "Sir," Jia said finally, "one October evening, because 9 years buys you one impertinent question a year." "The designer, Miss Bennett, is there something I should know?" Daehyun was standing at the window with the city coming on below him like circuitry. "A year ago," he said, "I watched a woman get executed in a ballroom. Everyone filmed her face. I couldn't stop watching her hands. She folded a man's fingers around his own cufflinks while he was ending her life in public. She was kinder to him in that moment than anyone has ever been to me at my best." He turned from the window. Then she stood in the rain like it was hers. Like the rain belonged to her and everyone else was borrowing it. Jia waited. "I have spent 1 year," Daehyun said, "making sure that nothing I did could touch her, because she was rebuilding and it had to be hers. The competition is real. The shortlist was blind. She earned every step, or I'd have burned the file myself." He picked up his coat. "But she's about to walk back into that ballroom, Jia. The venue bid came in this morning. The gala hosts want the Hanul Grand." Jia's pen stopped moving. "Sir, we could change the venue." "I could," he said. He was quiet a moment. "But she designed that room. Every crystal. It's the largest thing that was ever stolen from her." He shrugged into his coat, and his voice, when it came, had something underneath it that Jia had never heard in 9 years. Something banked and burning. "I don't want to protect her from that room," he said. "I want to stand at the door while she takes it back." The invitation specified the Hanul Grand Ballroom, and Dahlia read it standing in the Marigold kitchen, and set it down on the steel counter, and said, "Huh," in a voice that made Tony put down her knife. They sat up until 2 in the morning, and Tony said all the necessary things. "You don't have to go, you can present remotely, I will burn it down." But Dahlia sat with her hands around a mug of barley tea, looking at something in the middle distance, and finally said, "You know what I keep thinking? I keep thinking about the chandelier. 4,000 crystals, Tony. I chose them when I was 27. I was so happy that day. He doesn't even know they're mine. Nobody in that room will know the room is mine." She looked up. "Except me. And that used to be the tragedy. And I sat here just now and realized it's the weapon. I'm going to walk into the most expensive thing that man ever stole from me, and I'm going to win a bigger one, under his own ceiling." Tony looked at her cousin for a long moment. Then she stood, went to the walk-in, and came back with a bottle of champagne she'd been saving for a wedding neither of them mentioned, and said, "Okay, but we are going shopping, and this time the dress fits you, and this time you choose it." The dress she chose was deep green, the marigold green, the green she had mixed with her own hands, cut like a decision, and when she came out of the fitting room, Tony made a sound that brought staff running from 3 departments. 2 days before the gala, her phone rang. Song Jia, but not with logistics. "The chairman would like to know," Jia said, in the carefully neutral tone of a woman reading from a script she'd been made to swear not to edit, "whether you would do him the honor of arriving as his guest. He instructs me to clarify." Her voice flickered, 1 degree, toward humanity. "Not as Mireille's designer, as his guest. He also instructs me to tell you that if you prefer to arrive alone, his car and his door are yours anyway, and the question will never be asked again." Dahlia stood in her studio with the phone against her ear and her heart doing something unscheduled. "Tell him," she said. "I've walked into that ballroom alone before. Tell him I know exactly how it feels." She looked at the green dress hanging on the door. "This time I'd like to know how the other thing feels." The evening of the gala, Tony did her hair. They didn't talk about why it mattered, that it be Tony's hands and no one else's. Dahlia sat in the good chair by the window above the restaurant, and Tony worked in silence for a while, which for Tony was a love language requiring enormous effort, and the smell of the products was the smell of being 9 years old on a Saturday in her mother's salon, and at some point Dahlia's eyes closed. "Your mama would lose her whole mind tonight," Tony said softly, working an edge. "You know that, right? She'd have the church bus outside that ballroom. She'd tell me not to squint at people," Dahlia said. "Even the ones who deserve it." "She'd tell you," Tony said, and her voice did the thing it did when she was smuggling something serious inside something light, that she didn't change anybody, she just turned the lights on. Tony met her eyes in the mirror and held them. "Go turn the lights on, baby." Downstairs, at 7, a car arrived that was somehow quieter than the street around it, and the driver held the door, and on the seat, waiting, lay a single object. Her umbrella, the one she'd left with the Astor concierge a year ago, ebony handle, 1 gray crane in flight, and looped around the handle, a plain card with 4 words in a spare upright hand. "You'll want this back." Dahlia sat very still in the moving car, holding the umbrella across her lap like something rescued, while a year rearranged itself in her head. The rain, the shoulder, the espresso. "I don't mind the rain. What would you change?" The corner table on Thursdays, the man who never reached, an open hand, waiting, and she began, quietly, in the dark of the car, to laugh, and then not quite to laugh, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, and said, out loud, to no one, "Oh, you patient son of a gun." The night of the gala, the Hanil Grand wore its 4,000 crystals, and the cameras were stacked 5 deep at the entrance, because everyone who mattered had come to watch 3 firms fight for the country's biggest project, and because everyone who read gossip had come to watch Yoon Jae-sung, whose company was shortlisted too, and whose spring wedding had somehow never happened, and whose year, if you followed the financial pages closely, had been going very quietly, very badly. Jae-sung stood near the head of the room, thinner than last year in the way that stress makes men thin, with Seo Ara at his elbow, wearing an engagement ring and an expression like a contract under renegotiation. He was mid-sentence with 2 board members when the doors opened and the sound of the room changed. He turned, the way everyone turned. Dahlia Bennett came into the ballroom she had built like the architect returning to the site, unhurried, chin level, green silk moving like deep water, 1 year of Dawn Rivers and oxtail and sleep and dignity, walking on her own 2 feet under her own chandelier, and the crowd did the math out loud, in 100 whispers. "That's her. That's the wife. My God, look at her." Jae-sung looked. He looked the way a man looks at a door he threw away, standing in someone else's wall, open onto a garden. She was not thinner or heavier than the woman he'd discarded. She was simply, unmistakably, more present, more alive, more certain, glowing with the specific radiance of a woman who eats and sleeps and laughs and is loved by her own life. And he understood, in one vertiginous second, in front of witnesses, that whatever he had said a year ago in this room, the truth was standing in the doorway wearing green. She had never been too much for him. He had been too small for her. Everyone could see it. Ara could see it, and her hand tightened on his arm like a lion. And then the whispers doubled, because Ryu Daehyun of Mirai Capital, the man nobody photographed, the money everyone in the room had knelt to at some point, came through the doors half a step behind her, at her shoulder, unmistakably with her, and offered Dahlia his arm. She took it. Jae-sung started across the floor before his board members could stop him. He arrived in front of them with a face that had rebuilt itself into warmth, both hands extended, voice pitched for the nearest journalists. "Dahlia," he said, You look, my God, you look incredible. It's been too long." "Has it?" she said, pleasantly, and did not give him her hand. "You've changed," he said, softer, leaning in, and there was something raw underneath it, something almost sincere, which was the most offensive thing about it. "No," Dahlia said. "I stopped shrinking. You've just never seen me at scale." The nearest journalist wrote that down. Jae-sung's smile held, barely, and his eyes cut to Daehyun, and he did what men like him always did, reached for the room where he thought his power lived. "Chairman Ryu," he said, extending the handshake to him instead. "I don't believe you've been introduced to my ex-wife." Daehyun looked at Jae-sung's offered hand until it wilted. Then he placed his own hand, lightly, at the small of Dahlia's back, an ounce of pressure, a continent of meaning, and said, in a voice that carried exactly as far as he wanted it to, "You're mistaken. I've known her since the night you introduced her to everyone." It took Jae-sung 3 full seconds to understand, and the color that left his face went nowhere good. Somewhere behind them, a phone camera clicked, and Ara's voice, low and shaking, said, "Jae-sung, what does that mean? What night?" And the string quartet, God help them, began to play. The story broke at 6 in the morning, which told Dahlia everything about who had placed it, because 6 a.m. was when Jae-sung's PR firm had always fed the wires. American designer accused of stealing Yoon Hanul concepts. Sources allege shortlisted firm built on appropriated work. The article was a masterpiece of the genre, no named sources, no documents, just insinuation arranged like evidence. During her marriage, it murmured, Ms. Bennett had enjoyed privileged access to Yoon Hanul's proprietary design language. Industry observers noted similarities. Questions were being raised, by whom, it did not say, about whether Mireille's shortlist had been compromised by a personal relationship with the chairman, and there was the photograph from the gala, his hand at the small of her back, cropped tight, printed large. He had taken the 2 truest things she had, her work and whatever was growing in her chest, and fed them to the wires as crimes. By 9, 2 of Studio Dahlia's smaller clients had called to pause their projects, apologetic, cowardly, kind. By noon, the design forums had chosen teams. By 2, a Mireille board member was quoted, anonymously, wondering aloud whether the competition should be rerun in the interest of optics. Tony found her at the studio at 10 that night, standing at the pinned-up Cheongdam drawings with her arms folded, very still. "Say something," Tony said. "You're scaring me." "Scream, throw a stapler." "He knows it's true," Dahlia said quietly. "That's the genius of it. He knows I have the originals, so he accused me first. Now if I show them, I'm not a woman with proof. I'm a bitter ex making counterclaims with stolen documents." She laughed, one breath of it, with no humor in it at all. "He got there first, Tony. Truth doesn't matter if you're second." The confrontation with Ara happened the next afternoon, in the marble ladies' room of the Simone Loro boutique in Cheongdam, of all the stupid places, where Dahlia had gone to return a coat, and Ara had followed her in like it was choreography. She looked expensive and unslept. The engagement ring was still on, and she kept touching it, a tell, the way you touch a tooth that's dying. "You think you've won something," Ara said. "I think I'm returning a coat." "He watches the video," Ara said, and her voice cracked open on it, and everything ugly and human underneath came through. "Did you know that? The gala clip, from last year. I found it in his history, over and over, the part where you walk away. He watches you leave him like it's a wound he pays someone to keep open." She stepped closer, perfume and desperation. "I did everything right. I'm everything you're not, and he's still. All he talks about is the Mireille bid. Getting back what's his. She said you'd do this, my mother. She said never marry a man you helped bury his wife." Dahlia looked at this 27-year-old girl, standing in the wreckage of a trap she'd helped build, and then walked into herself, and found, to her own surprise, that what she felt was almost pity. "Ara," she said, gently, "listen to me, because nobody else will say it to you. You didn't take my place. You took my job. The job is holding up a mirror, the exact size he needs, and disappearing behind it. The salary is this." She nodded at the marble, the perfume, the ring. "The pension is a ballroom, and a microphone, and everyone you know watching." She picked up her bag. "I'm not the warning, sweetheart. I'm the preview." She was at the door when Ara said, very quietly, to her back, "He's going to destroy you at the press conference Thursday. Both of you. He's been planning it for weeks." And then, in a whisper that sounded like it was escaping rather than being spoken, "Look at the venue reservation under his mother's maiden name." Dahlia stopped. She didn't turn around. "Why tell me?" Silence. And then, in the mirror, she saw Era twist the dying ring once around her finger. "Because she also said," Era whispered, "that when the ship starts sinking, be the one holding a map. That night, Daehyun came to the rooftop of the Astor, where his assistant had told Dahlia he went when he wouldn't answer his phone, and found her already there, leaning on the parapet with the city spread out below like spilled jewelry. Of course she'd gotten up there. His security had probably just opened doors for her. Everyone opened doors for her lately. It was the strangest phenomenon, his entire fortress simply reorganizing itself around her, as if she carried paperwork from a higher authority. "I'm withdrawing from the competition," she said, without turning around. "Tomorrow morning, it kills the story. Your board gets its optics. The project survives. You survive. It's the clean move and you know it." He came and stood beside her at the parapet, not touching, coat shoulder to bare shoulder, and was quiet for a while. "My father," he said, "was a pattern cutter, and it was so far from what she'd expected that she turned. In a textile mill in Daegu, 30 years. The owners ran it into the ground, stealing from the pension fund, and when it collapsed, the newspapers printed the workers' faces under the word failure. My mother cleaned offices at night so I could sit the university exams. She died the spring before I bought the mill." He said it evenly, a man laying documents on a table. "I bought it first, before anything else, when it made no financial sense, because I needed to own the place that broke him. Everyone calls it the foundation of an empire. It's a grave I happen to operate." The city hummed below them. Dahlia waited, open-handed. "I know exactly what it costs," he said, "to watch someone be erased politely, in public, by people with better lawyers. I watched it done to my father by men whose names are on university buildings now, and then last year I stood in a lobby and watched it happen to you in real time, in a room you built, and I have never in my life wanted so badly to burn something down." He turned to face her, and the control in his voice didn't slip, which somehow made it worse, made it bigger. "You will not withdraw. Not to protect me, not to protect Mireille. I did not wait a year, and eat 40 Thursday dinners alone like a monk, and buy an umbrella company, Dahlia, to watch you hand him your name twice." The wind moved between them. She looked up at him, at this vast, patient, ridiculous man, and heard her own voice come out low. "You bought the umbrella company." "They stitch things that last," he said. Her hand found his lapel, not pulling, just resting, the way you touch something to make sure it's real, and his came up and covered it, engulfed it, and his forehead lowered until it nearly touched hers, close enough that when he spoke she felt it more than heard it. "Be careful what you start," she whispered. "I started this a year ago," he said, "in the rain. You're only just catching up." Her phone rang. She would have let it die. She was done letting phones govern her life, but the screen said a name that made her step back and answer, breath unsteady. Mrs. Im, whom she had not heard from in 13 months. The old woman's voice was low and fast, the voice of someone calling from inside a house she was afraid of. "He's shredding," Mrs. Im said. "Tonight, in the home office, the old files, the Chicago years. But he doesn't know, child. Listen to me. He never knew. All these years I kept the household courier logs. Every envelope you ever sent from that kitchen table, every date, every drawing that boy signed his name over, logged in and stamped, because a good house keeps records. 60 years I've kept books for rich men. I know exactly what they forget the help can see." A pause, and a sound like a smile breaking on an old face. "Come get your receipts, Mrs. Yoon." "It's Bennett," Dahlia said, and her eyes were stinging, and across the rooftop Daehyun was already holding the door. Mrs. Im laughed softly. "It always was," she said. The press conference had been called by Yoon Hanyul Group for 11 a.m. Thursday, and no one who understood the man was surprised, the Hanyul Grand Ballroom, under the 4,000 crystals, because Jae-sung had a killer's instinct for symbolism and a dead man's blindness to whom the symbols actually belonged. He opened alone at the podium, somber, presidential, regretful. He spoke of intellectual property as sacred trust. He spoke of painful personal history he had hoped never to revisit. He was 6 minutes into a sentence about being reluctantly compelled to protect his company's legacy when the doors at the back of the ballroom opened. She wore charcoal, work clothes, the clothes of a woman on a job site, and she came down the center aisle with a portfolio case in one hand and Song Jia flanking her with a document box, and the room's 200 journalists turned like a field of antennae. Jae-sung's voice stopped. At the side of the room, unannounced, unphotographed until this exact moment, Ryu Daehyun stepped out of the shadow of a marble column he had personally approved the invoice for, and stood, hands folded, watching, and every camera in the room understood the geometry instantly, and began to feed. Dahlia reached the front row and stopped, and looked up at her ex-husband at his podium, and her voice, when it came, was even and clear and carried to the chandelier. "You called this press conference about stolen design work," she said. "I agree it should be discussed. May I?" What followed took 11 minutes, and clips of it would eventually be watched, in aggregate, over 300 million times. She laid the originals on the press table one by one, and the cameras crawled over them live. The Hanul Grand Concept Set, dated 14 months before groundbreaking, signed D. Bennett. The lighting studies for the steps outside, in her hand, the chandelier specification, 4,000 crystals, her annotations in the margins, and she looked up, briefly, at the actual chandelier blazing above the actual room, and 200 journalists looked up with her, and the entire building became her exhibit. Then the courier logs. Mrs. Im had brought them personally, and sat in the second row in her church coat to see it done. 60 years of household bookkeeping, every envelope from the kitchen table to the corporate design office, dated, stamped, initialed by the same staff architects whose names now sat under Jae-sung's on 11 patents. Then, last, a manila folder, soft with handling, and Dahlia's voice moved for the first time, a fraction. "My mother ran a hair salon in Chicago for 31 years, she said. She kept every article about the hotel my husband's company said he designed. She wrote the truth in the margin of every single one, 14 times, in ballpoint pen, because it was all she had. She died believing no one would ever read it." Dahlia set the folder down, open, the arrows visible. "That's Dahlia's, that's Dahlia's," and the photographers descended on an old woman's handwriting, like it was a signing treaty, and somewhere in the second row, Mrs. Im pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, and in row 5, a reporter from a wire service was crying openly while she typed. "I'm not here for his company," Dahlia said finally. "I'm not suing for the buildings. He can keep the buildings. They were never the point. And honestly, and here, for one devastating second, a year of Tony's kitchen flickered at the corner of her mouth. The maintenance costs are brutal." Laughter, shocked and grateful, rippled the room, and broke something open in it. "I came for the record. My name is Dahlia Bennett. I designed this room when I was 27 years old. He knew it every day of our marriage, and he knew it last year when he stood under my chandelier and told the world I had contributed nothing but embarrassment." She closed the portfolio. "The work was mine, the years were mine, the name is mine. As of today I have all 3 back, and he is welcome, at last, to everything that was actually his." She stepped back from the table. And Jae-sung, white-knuckled at his podium, cornered, bleeding, chose that moment to prove that character is destiny, leaned into his microphone, and said, "Horse, she's lying. She was nothing when I found her. She was a fat little intern from the South Side, and I made her." The word landed in the silence, like something dropped from the ceiling. 200 journalists held their breath, and Ryu Dae-hyun walked, without hurry, across the front of the ballroom, past the press table, and stood beside Dahlia Bennett, facing her ex-husband, and delivered, at conversational volume, in the acoustics she had designed, the only public statement anyone had heard him make in 9 years. "You found a genius," he said, "and you spent 6 years trying to make her small enough to fit inside your opinion of yourself. It didn't work. Look at this room." He didn't gesture. He didn't need to. Everyone was already looking. "It never once fit you." He turned to the cameras, unhurried. Mirai Capital's competition concluded this morning. The Cheongdam flagship will be designed by Studio Dahlia, whose principal owns, among other things, the finest unpaid design portfolio in this country's history. We are also, as of 9 a.m., no longer reviewing any investment in Yoon Hanil Group, and I'd encourage the gentlemen from the Seo Group in the third row to check their messages. The gentlemen from the Seo Group were already standing. So, in the corner of every frame was Ara, who looked at Jae-sung for a long moment at his podium, then took off the ring, set it on the press table next to the courier logs, quietly, like the last document in evidence, and walked up the center aisle and out of the ballroom, and the doors closing behind her echoed under the crystals for what felt like a very long time. The board of Yoon Hanul Group announced its leadership transition 11 days later. Nobody was surprised. The market had already decided, the way rooms decide, the way that room had decided. In the 11 minutes it took a discarded wife to lay her receipts on a table under her own light. The Marigold closed early that night, one hand-lettered sign, private event, and the private event was 14 people and Tony cooking like the Harvest Festival, and Mrs. Im, 3 glasses of Bakbunja in, telling stories about corporate wives that made Songjia laugh so hard she had to leave the room. Dahlia found Dae-hyun in the doorway to the kitchen, out of the noise, watching her the way he had watched her for a year, patient, unhurried, certain, and she came and stood in front of him, with her heart walking around outside her body, and neither of them said anything for a while, because they were both fluent in silence. It was the first language they'd ever spoken to each other. "I keep thinking about something," she said finally. "A year ago you watched a man tell the whole world I was too much. Too much wife, too much woman, too much trouble." She looked up at him. "You've had a year of Thursdays to check, so, tell me the truth. Is it true?" He considered it with the gravity he gave term sheets. "Yes," he said. She blinked. You are far too much, Daehyun said, for a man that small. His hand came up and rested along her jaw, thumb at her cheekbone, the first time he had ever touched her face, and it was the most careful thing $40 billion had ever done. For me, he said, you're the first thing in my life that's ever been enough. She kissed him, or he kissed her. 14 witnesses would dispute it forever, and Tony would testify at every retelling that she saw it coming in April, and somewhere in the noise and light of a 28-seat restaurant in a crooked alley, under a plaster magnolia, a woman who had once stood alone in the rain outside her own life, stood exactly, precisely inside it, chosen, seen, home. The Aster Cheongdam opened 20 months later, on a spring evening, to reviews that used the word masterpiece with unprofessional frequency. The back of house had windows. The staff canteen had the second best view in the building. By the entrance, set into Pocheon granite that would age instead of stain, a small bronze plaque read, designed by Dahlia Bennett, and beneath it, smaller, at her insistence, for Ruthie, who turned the lights on, it rained on opening night. Of course it rained. They stood at the top of the steps she had designed to catch the light, watching guests stream in below, and Daehyun opened the umbrella, ebony handle, one gray crane in flight, and held it over them both, and Dahlia leaned into his shoulder and watched the rain come down on everything she had built and everything she had survived, and smiled. You know, she said, I never did thank you for this umbrella. You kept it, he said. That was the thank you. She laughed, and the sound went down the steps and into the light. Then she took the handle from his hand and held it over the two of them herself, and said, Come on, Chairman, it's our room, and, taking the arm of the man who had waited in the rain for her twice, walked in.